A servant girl bound by silence, a vampire queen whose cruelty knew no limits, and a king who hadn't felt anything in a century until he saw the marks carved into her back. For years, Seraphina Kael survived the halls of the Crimson Court like a shadow, mortal, silenced by blood-binding magic, invisible beneath layers of bruises, scars, and whispered curses. To Queen Malverra, Seraphina was nothing more than a servant to command, punish, and forget. She was useful only in her silence, and punished any time she dared to be more. Until the day King Damonius Thane returned from exile. He didn't return with fanfare. He returned in silence, with eyes like blood fire and a reputation built on fear. But when those eyes found Seraphina, not in defiance, not in seduction, just bowed, bruised, bleeding quietly, he didn't look away. And when her torn dress revealed the scars etched into her back, something ancient and terrifying broke open inside him. He was not supposed to care, but he did. He was not supposed to protect her, but he stepped between her and the Queen's wrath before he even knew her name. And that was the beginning, not of war, but of something far more dangerous in a court ruled by fear. Love. If you've ever believed that survival is not the end of your story, if you crave slow-burn tension, fierce protection, and love that rises from ruin, if you believe that scars can lead us to soulmates, this story was made for you. Hit subscribe and join us daily for new romantic tales, where the quiet girl in the corner might just become the queen. Because before Seraphina was anything, a survivor, a symbol, a queen. She was a girl with no voice, working in the shadows of monsters. And the day he saw her was the day everything began to change. She never cried, not when they whipped her, not when the queen smiled watching. But when he looked at her back, she broke, and something ancient broke with her. The palace called it mercy to keep her silent. Seraphina Kael had not spoken a word in 7 years. Not since the spell was carved into her tongue with the queen's own blood. Not since she'd been dragged from the ash-covered ruins of her family's home and forced into service as a mortal among monsters. They said silence made her easier to manage, but it didn't stop her from remembering. She remembered every bruise, every command, every lash of the silver whip that cracked across her back when the queen was bored or angry or simply amused. And still, she stayed, because to leave meant death. And despite everything, Seraphina still wanted to live, even if no one saw her anymore. She drifted like a ghost through the castle, pale, quiet, obedient. Her linen apron was always clean. Her eyes never met another's for longer than a second, and her footsteps never made a sound on the stone floor of Veilblood Keep, the throne of Queen Malverra. The queen, all teeth and velvet and cruelty, had broken many servants, but Seraphina, she had buried herself, folded her soul into something small and unthreatening. She did not flinch, she did not cry, she did not speak, and so she was forgotten, until he returned. It was the first full court in years, summoned with whispers and nerves, because King Damonius Thane had returned from exile. They said he had not spoken since the war, that he had bathed in blood, that he was half shadow now, more death than man. His absence had allowed Queen Malverra to rule uncontested, cruel, unchecked, and feared. But now the king was back, and the keep held its breath. Seraphina stood in her usual place, near the back of the hall, hands folded neatly, eyes low. Just another servant, just background noise, until the queen's voice rang out, sharp and false sweet. "She's stolen from my chambers again," Malverra said, pointing one bejeweled claw toward Seraphina. My sapphire ring is missing. Search her." Seraphina didn't move. She couldn't speak to defend herself, couldn't protest. Couldn't even scream when a guard grabbed her by the arm and yanked her forward into the center of the court. Her heart pounded, but her face remained blank. She had done nothing. This was a game. It always was. A punishment. A display. Then he spoke. "Wait!" The voice was a knife of command. Damonius. Seraphina turned her head slightly, just enough to glimpse him, and the moment his eyes landed on her, he froze. Not in confusion, not in recognition, but something deeper, something ancient. He stepped forward, slowly. The crowd parted without being told. His voice, low and calm, sent a ripple through the room. "Turn her around." The guard hesitated. Malverra's smile twitched. Damonius's gaze didn't shift. "Now, Rough hands spun her by the shoulders. Seraphina's back faced the throne. And that was when her dress, worn thin and frayed, tore at the seam. The court gasped, because beneath the fabric were scars. Deep, precise, intentional. Not from accident, not from work, from punishment. Crossed lines, crisscrossed lashes, some still faintly red, some old and silvery white. The room fell silent. No one spoke. But he moved. Damonius stepped forward one slow step at a time until he stood behind her. Seraphina didn't breathe. She expected fury. From the queen, from the guards, from him. But all he did was speak, in a voice so soft it cracked something in her. "Who did this to you?" She wanted to answer, tried, but her lips trembled and no sound came. Still, he seemed to understand. His voice darkened like thunder over water. "Who did this?" The queen laughed, too high, too loud. "Come now, Damonius. She's a mortal. Fragile things bruise so easily. I doubt." But he turned, slowly, red eyes burning like twin suns, and he said, "If you ever touch her again, I will tear this court apart, bone by bone." Gasps, shouts. The queen stood, but it was too late. Damonius moved. One step brought him beside Seraphina. The next brought his cloak over her shoulders. He shielded her, with his body, with his silence. And as she leaned into the warmth of that fabric, something shattered inside her. A dam that had held back everything. Tears, the first she'd shed in years. She did not weep. She didn't sob. She simply breathed. And that, for Seraphina, was revolution enough. If you've ever wondered whether kindness can survive in the cruelest place, if you've ever believed that love can begin with just a glance, if you know what it means to be unseen until the right eyes finally find you. The cloak around her shoulders still held his scent. Old earth and stormlight, like rain falling over stone. Seraphina hadn't moved since the king placed it there. She stood in the silence he created. A silence not from spells or fear, but from power. From the kind of command that made even nobles forget how to breathe. "Take her to the East Wing," Damonius ordered quietly, his voice like iron wrapped in silk. "She doesn't belong in the servant halls anymore." Queen Malverra laughed behind clenched teeth. "You'd pamper a thief, my king?" He didn't even look at her. "I'd protect what's mine." The room trembled. But Seraphina didn't understand what had just happened. Not fully. All she knew was that her heart thundered louder than the court's whispers. And the king, had looked at her as if her pain mattered. That hadn't happened in years. The chamber in the East Wing was warm, too warm. Firelight danced across the walls, chasing away shadows Seraphina had grown used to curling up with. A tray of food waited on a gilded table. Untouched. She didn't trust it. She didn't trust any of this. The silence spell still bound her tongue. Even when she opened her mouth, nothing but breath emerged. But now, it felt different. Fragile, as if it wanted to break. The cloak still hung around her shoulders like armor. She clutched it tighter, and then... a knock. She turned. Damonius stood in the doorway, alone. The fire reflected off his silver hair, catching the red gleam of his eyes. Yet they softened when they landed on her. "You're safe," he said. Seraphina couldn't answer. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a whisper of sound. "Tell me who hurt you." She tried. Her lips formed the shape of words she hadn't dared whisper in years. "The... Q." Her throat constricted. Her tongue burned. Her voice vanished. Damonius's jaw clenched. "A blood-binding silencer," he muttered. "Clever. Cruel." He stepped closer, slowly, as though not to startle her. "Do you know who you are?" She blinked. Didn't she? He reached toward her careful and pulled something from beneath his cloak. A piece of folded parchment, old and faded. "I searched the servant registry. You weren't listed. So I asked the old steward who trained the kitchen hands. He gave me this." He handed it to her. Seraphina unfolded it with shaking fingers. It was a record, barely legible, of an orphan girl taken into the castle's custody 7 winters ago. Her name listed as Seraphina Kael. Damonius said the name softly. Kael blood. And he stopped breathing. Seraphina looked up at him, confusion knitting her brow. He stepped back like something had struck him. "That can't be," he whispered. "The Kael line was purged, wiped out in the first uprising. My mother said it was necessary, that they were traitors." His gaze snapped to her. "You're her descendant. The House of Mercy, the old royal bloodline." Seraphina's breath caught. It couldn't be. Her parents. They'd told her nothing. She remembered fire, screams, a rose-shaped pendant thrown into her hands before they shoved her into the cellar. "I saw you," Damonius murmured, his voice laced with something like awe. "Once, when I was just a boy." Her heart stuttered. "There was a ball in the moon garden. You were barely older than me. You wore silver, and you sang." A memory flashed, hazy, fragile, of a boy with dark eyes who gave her a red moon rose and promised never to let anyone hurt her. Seraphina reached up, fingers brushing the base of her throat. She had no necklace now, but the ghost of it still lingered. She had known him, and he had remembered her. That night, sleep was a battlefield. Seraphina dreamed of music drifting through moonlight, of vines curling over stone fountains and petals opening beneath her bare feet. She saw the garden again, just as it had once been, untainted, soft with memory. A boy waited near the rose arbor. He looked older now, but his smile was the same, gentle, certain. "Don't be afraid," he said, holding out a single moonrose. "I'll come back for you." "Promise?" her younger self whispered. His eyes met hers, deep and endless. "Always." She woke, gasping. The fire had burned low. Shadows danced across the walls. But something inside her had shifted. She wasn't just a servant, not just a girl with scars. She was Kael blood, and he was the boy who'd promised to protect her. Back in his chambers, Damonius poured through old records with trembling hands. Seraphina Kael. He remembered now. The girl who sang under moonlight, who brought him laughter when his crown had grown too heavy. He'd searched for her once, but the queen told him she was dead, that the rebels had taken her and burned her family with the rest. But she hadn't died. She'd been hidden, silenced. He slammed the book shut, fury flaring in his chest. Malverra had lied. She'd taken a child of peace and turned her into a servant, a scapegoat, a victim. And still, Seraphina had survived. The next morning, the Queen summoned the court again. "Still keeping that mortal girl in your wing, my king," she purred, a warning beneath the sweetness. "People might start to think she matters." Damonius met her gaze without blinking. "She does." The room fell still. Whispers rippled through the nobles. The Queen's smile sharpened, but Damonius didn't care. He remembered now. He remembered her. And he wasn't going to lose her again. Scars can bury stories. Spells can bury names. But love, even forgotten, will always remember its way home. The storm rolled in before dawn. Lightning licked the sky outside the eastern tower, illuminating the old palace stones like bones beneath flesh. The wind howled low, like it was mourning something that hadn't yet died. Damonius couldn't sleep. He hadn't slept since the court gathering, since he'd seen the scars on her back, since the name Kael ripped a hole through his memory, like a blade through silk. Now he stood before the locked chamber of forbidden tomes, the Queen's personal grimoire vault. No guards, no eyes, no hesitation. He waved his hand over the iron seal, whispered the old word for unmake, and stepped inside. Dust danced in the candlelight. Shelves rose like cathedral columns, filled with leather-bound books bound in bone and blood. The air reeked of old magic and secrets too heavy for daylight. He searched for hours, and then he found it. A thin crimson journal marked with a sun and thorn crest. Malverra's private sigil. The blood of her victims shimmered faintly across the spine. Inside, her handwriting curled like vines across pages of cruelty. There it was. Kael child, too soft, too dangerous, enacted spell 39, silencer of sovereign threats, bound her voice to her blood. She speaks, she burns. Damonius's hand curled into a fist. The Queen had known who Seraphina was, all along. And instead of killing her, she had buried her. In silence, in servitude, in pain. Not out of mercy, out of control. But why? Why keep her alive? He turned the page. Her death would fulfill the prophecy. Her silence delays it. So long as no one kisses the girl, so long as the Kael blood remains unseen, the throne is safe. Damonius dropped the journal. Kisses, blood, prophecy. He didn't understand it fully yet, but one thing was clear. Seraphina Kael was not just a servant, not just a forgotten name. She was the key to everything. Back in the East Wing, Seraphina sat at the window, watching the storm with wide eyes. Thunder never frightened her, not after what she'd survived. Still, something about this night felt different. Electric, heavy with meaning. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She didn't expect anyone. Not at this hour. It opened anyway. Damonius entered, soaked through, his cloak dripping on the stone. She stood instinctively, wrapping the robe tighter around herself. Her breath hitched, but he didn't speak. He just looked at her, like she mattered. He crossed the room slowly, not with a predator's pace, but like a man who didn't want to scare the fragile thing he'd just begun to understand. He set a bundle on the table, warm bread, fruit, a bottle of rich red wine. I figured the Queen didn't feed you anything worth tasting, he said quietly. Seraphina blinked and nodded. Still no words, still the spell held, but her eyes were wide with gratitude. May I? He asked, gesturing to the window. She stepped aside. For a long moment they stood side by side, watching rain streak across the stained glass. Thunder cracked in the distance, and still silence. Not the spell now, just the comfort of not having to speak. Damonius turned toward her slowly, his expression unreadable. "Every time I close my eyes," he murmured, "I see your back, the scars. And I wonder what kind of monster could live so long and never notice what's happening under his own roof." She looked at him. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked ashamed. "I should have come back sooner," he said, voice rough. "If I had, maybe things would be different." She didn't know what to do, what to say, what to feel. But her hand moved, hesitant, and rested lightly on his forearm. He froze, then looked down. Their hands touched. And for the first time in 7 years, the spell flickered, just for a second. A breath caught in her throat. The magic in her chest shivered. It didn't break, but it wavered. Damonius noticed it too. His eyes snapped to hers. I think it's tied to your heart," he whispered. "To trust. To safety. If you felt safe, even for a moment, it weakened." She nodded. A single tear slipped down her cheek. He lifted his hand and very slowly brushed it away. That was all. No kiss, no embrace. But it felt like one, a touch made of promises, not power. And Seraphina felt something stir in her chest, something soft, something fragile, something dangerous. The next morning, the Queen summoned her to the halls. But this time, Seraphina did not go alone. Damonius stood beside her as she walked the corridor. Every noble who once ignored her now stared. She wore a fresh gown. Her hair was braided, and the king walked beside her. Not a pet, not a prisoner, a presence. At the throne room, Malverra's smile was carved in ice. "Well," the Queen said sweetly. "It seems the dog has found herself a collar made of rubies." Damonius didn't blink. "Careful, Malverra. You're forgetting who forged the crown you wear." She laughed. "Oh, I remember. You're the one who left it behind." Seraphina stood silently, but she didn't lower her head, not this time. The Queen's eyes narrowed. Something had changed. She could smell it, but she didn't know what. That night, Seraphina stood by the window again, alone this time. Rain had stopped, the sky cleared, but inside her, a storm still brewed. She touched her throat. No words came, but she could feel them. Right there, beneath her skin, beneath the spell, waiting. She closed her eyes and whispered, not aloud, not yet, but in her heart, "He remembered me." He didn't look away. He made the silence flicker. For the first time in years, Seraphina felt something close to hope, and outside her window, a moonrose bloomed. Some chains are forged from blood, some from silence, but the right touch, the right heart, can make even ancient magic tremble. If you're still here, love, tell us in the comments. Have you ever been seen for the first time by someone who mattered? There were 2 kinds of poison in the vampire court, the kind you drank and the kind you spoke. Queen Malverra had mastered both, and tonight she poured them freely. The grand chamber reeked of incense and tension. Nobles lined the obsidian pillars, their crimson robes whispering as they turned to look at the servant girl standing before the throne. Her head bowed, her lips sealed. Seraphina Kael. Again summoned, again accused. The Queen lounged in her spiked throne, jeweled goblet in hand, her voice velvet-wrapped venom. "The blood wine was tainted. Prince Gryavon nearly vomited fire," she said sweetly. And curiously, the only hands near the cellar last night were hers. She lifted a finger lazily toward Seraphina. "Would you like to confess now, little mouse?" Seraphina stood stone still. her fingers clenched in the folds of her skirt. No voice came. The spell was still tight in her throat, and the Queen knew it. She always did. Gasps rose from the crowd. Whispers, murmurs, accusations. Damonius stood near the court's edge, arms crossed, watching. He had been silent throughout the gathering, not out of fear, but because something inside him waited. And then he stepped forward. One step, then another, until his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. "She didn't poison anyone." Malverra's eyes glinted like daggers in candlelight. "Oh," she purred. "And what makes you so sure, Your Majesty? Have you developed a taste for defending traitors?" "I've developed a nose," Damonius said coldly. "And I know damn well the scent of framed wine when I smell it." Laughter rippled, then faded under the weight of his glare. Malverra tilted her head. "And if she's innocent, how would you prove it?" "She's bound by silence," he growled, "but not by shame." He turned to Seraphina, gently, carefully, as if she were glass. "Seraphina, let me prove your innocence." Her eyes met his, wide, wet, afraid, but she nodded once. The court held its breath. Damonius gestured to a guard. "Bring the healer. Have her examined for marks." The Queen scoffed. "Unnecessary. I wasn't asking." 2 more guards stepped forward. 1 woman, 1 man, both visibly uncomfortable. But they obeyed. Seraphina was led to the center of the court, where the light of the chandelier pooled like judgment. She did not resist, not as her dress was unlaced, not as her sleeves fell, and not as the back of her gown dropped to her waist, revealing the truth she'd carried, in silence, for 7 long, brutal years. The chamber froze. What they saw was not just skin. It was a history written in blood. Dozens of lashes, crossed brands, circular burns, a lattice of torment carved into the delicate arch of her back. Not fresh, no. These were old, healed, faded but unmistakable. And at the center of them all, glowing faintly like something sacred, was a sigil, the Kael crest, forgotten by most. Forbidden to speak of, until now. Seraphina trembled. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she stood tall, even as her tears fell freely for the first time in years. No magic stopped them. No curse contained them. They fell, like freedom. Damonius moved like a storm breaking free of its cage. He stood before the court, voice sharp as steel. "Who did this to her?" Silence, not magical this time, just shock, terror. No one answered, no one dared, except Queen Malverra. She rose slowly, gracefully, like a snake coiling. "Punishments are necessary in any kingdom," she said, "and traitor blood must be controlled." "She was a child," Damonius thundered. "She was a servant. She was silenced and marked like livestock." "She was Kael," Malverra hissed. "And you know what that means." Damonius stepped toward her, close enough that even the guards flinched. "And I know," he said lowly, "that if any other ruler had done this, we would have declared it a war crime." He turned to the council. "All of you saw her. All of you see her now. Her scars, her crest, her silence." The nobles shifted uneasily. "This is not about wine, or duty, or ancient bloodlines." His voice dropped, but it carried across every heart in the chamber. "This is about power built on pain, on silence, on the backs of those too scared to scream." He turned back to Seraphina. Then he did something no one expected. He walked toward her, dropped to one knee, and bowed his head. "I failed to protect you once," he whispered. "I will not fail again." Then louder, "From this moment forward, Seraphina Kael is under my royal protection. Touch her again, and I will burn this court to ash." The chamber exploded. Some nobles cried out in support. Others shouted in horror. But Malverra, oh Malverra, she simply stared, like a predator who'd finally felt prey slip from her jaws. And she hated it. Later that night, in the quiet of the healing wing, Seraphina sat by the fire, a fresh robe draped around her shoulders. Her back stung, but the pain was familiar. What was not familiar was the warmth beside her. Damonius sat across from her, wine in hand, his eyes never leaving hers. He hadn't spoken since they arrived. He didn't need to. Seraphina reached forward, slowly, brushed her fingers along the edge of his cloak. He didn't flinch. Instead, he lifted her hand and placed it against his chest, right over his heart. She didn't speak, but he heard her, in the way she looked at him, in the way she let herself be seen. And maybe, just maybe, the silence between them was no longer something broken, but something beautiful. There are scars that shame, and scars that scream, but some speak the truth that love was brave enough to listen for. Let me know in the comments. What's a moment in your life when someone truly saw you? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for the next chapter in this spellbound love story, where crowns are carved from compassion and silence becomes strength. They said the moon garden had withered, that after the last Queen of Peace was exiled and the royal house of Kael destroyed, the roses stopped blooming, that the moonlight no longer softened the earth there. Only shadows reigned. But tonight, Seraphina walked the path blindfolded, guided only by the soft brush of Damonius's hand around hers. She didn't ask where they were going. She trusted him now. Not because he was king, but because when the court looked at her like an object, he had looked at her like a person. The stone archway was overgrown, choked with ivy and memory. But as Damonius pushed it open, a soft breeze danced through the clearing beyond. Moonlight pooled like silver milk across the soil. And the scent, it bloomed like something ancient. "Roses," Seraphina breathed. Her first free word since childhood. The spell had cracked in court. But now, in the garden, it was gone. Truly gone. Damonius watched her like he didn't dare blink. "You remember this place?" She nodded slowly, stepping into the garden like it was a dream she'd once lived in. "It's real. I thought I made it up." He smiled faintly. "No. We came here once, the night before I left for war." Seraphina's fingers brushed the petals of a silvery bloom. "You gave me a rose. You wore it in your braid. You said you'd come back." He stilled. "I did." The weight of the words settled between them, warm and solemn. The moon garden shimmered softly, vines climbing higher as if trying to listen. "I waited here," Seraphina whispered. "I thought you forgot." Damonius stepped forward. "They made me forget. They erased it, bound it in blood. I only remembered after I saw your scars, and your name." Seraphina turned toward him, tears catching moonlight on her lashes. "I thought I wasn't worth remembering." "Don't say that," he said, his voice breaking. "You were the only real thing I had, even as a boy. I saw you. You smiled at me like I wasn't a monster." "You weren't." "I am now," he murmured, lifting her hand gently, pressing it to his chest. "But when you look at me like this, I remember who I was." Her breath hitched, and then softly, instinctively, She began to hum. A lullaby. The one she thought she'd long forgotten. The one she used to sing to herself when the darkness was too loud and the whips too sharp. Damonius froze. Then he hummed it back. Perfectly. Like he'd never stopped. Seraphina's hand trembled. You remembered the song. You sang it in the garden that night, he said, voice husky. I sat behind the rose wall and listened, too scared to speak. You said it was your mother's. She nodded. It was. She used to sing it to me before they took her away. They stood in the center of the forgotten garden, surrounded by blooming moon roses, the air thick with memory and something more dangerous, hope. Then her fingers brushed his cheek. Damonius, she whispered. He leaned in, barely inches between them, his breath a prayer against her lips. I dreamed of you, he said. She closed her eyes. I never stopped. The moment stretched, trembling. Then he leaned closer. Their foreheads touched, their hands twined. But just before their lips met, a tremor passed between them. Not from fear of each other, but fear of what their kiss might awaken. The court, the queen, the prophecy. So they pulled apart, still holding on, still breathing each other in like the garden itself had been waiting for them. Seraphina laughed softly, the sound fragile and luminous. I'm afraid, she admitted. So am I. But I don't want to be. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then don't be. She met his eyes. And what happens now? We remember, Damonius said. Everything they made us forget. And we decide, together, what comes next. Somewhere deep in the palace, the queen's spies whispered. Her handmaids reported the roses had bloomed. The silencing spell had shattered. And Malverra? She screamed. Some love stories aren't born. They're remembered. And when silence breaks, the heart finally speaks. If this moment stirred you, drop a moon in the comments. The queen had spoken. Her words rang like a death sentence through the palace halls. The girl dies before sunrise. No trial, no defense, no clemency. Seraphina, the servant once unseen, was now seen too clearly. And for that, she was to be silenced forever. Damonius stood alone in the war room, the weight of her name burning on his tongue. Kael. A name once erased from the royal scrolls. A name that had not been spoken in decades. Not since Queen Malverra seized the throne in a sea of blood and betrayal. Now it pulsed through him like a curse and a call. He had to know the truth, the whole truth, before they killed her. The staircase beneath the palace hadn't been used in over a century. The stones were slick with age and secrets, each step whispering ghosts into the dark. At the bottom, behind a rusted gate and a wall carved with ancient glyphs, the seer waited. Not a woman, not a man, not something wholly mortal, but the last oracle of the moon court, blind in both eyes and veiled in shadowed flame. You come, the seer rasped, bearing the weight of a girl marked by mercy. Her name is Seraphina, Damonius said, and the queen has ordered her death. The seer smiled, revealing teeth like pearl daggers. The queen fears what she cannot kill. I need answers. You want prophecy. I want truth. The seer leaned forward. Then bleed for it. Damonius didn't hesitate. He drew his dagger across his palm and let his blood drip into the ceremonial basin between them. The glyphs lit up, casting silver fire across the room. She carries a name that was meant to die, the seer whispered, voice echoing like wind through bone. Kael, daughter of the bloodline you were made to forget. Damonius clenched his jaw. Why was she silenced? To keep her from becoming what she was born to be. And what is that? The seer's eyes burned brighter. Queen of the throne of mercy. The room trembled. The seer continued, voice a chant now, a song long buried in darkness. She who bears the scars of silence shall carry the crest of the exiled line. If kissed by the heart-bound king, she will awaken the throne sealed in blood, and the queen of cruelty shall fall, not by blade, but by mercy reborn. Damonius staggered back, heart hammering, Seraphina's scars. They weren't just the marks of abuse, they were the royal crest, burned into her back not as punishment, but as warning. An ancient sigil, erased from history, now lived again through her body. She was the last heir of the House of Mercy, a girl once thought insignificant, now the very key to destroying Malverra. Damonius burst into his chambers, cloak swirling like smoke. Seraphina stood by the window. Bathed in moonlight, still wearing the same tattered dress from the court hearing. Her eyes found his, soft and steady. You look like you've seen a ghost. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. You're not who they told you you were. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. What do you mean? You are Kael blood, royal blood, a true heir to the throne that ruled before Malverra's rise. No, she whispered. I'm a servant. No, he said, voice sharp with emotion. You were made one. You were silenced to erase your truth. She backed away, trembling. Why tell me this now? It changes nothing. I'm still to be executed. Damonius closed the distance between them. It changes everything. Then he whispered the prophecy, word by word, and Seraphina crumbled. Not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of being seen again. This is why I've always felt her watching me, why I've never been able to leave. Her voice cracked. I'm her unfinished war. No, Damonius said, cupping her face. You are her undoing. Her lips parted, but no words came. You deserve to choose your life, he whispered. Then let me, she said. He nodded. I will fight her. I'll challenge the execution. I'll tear down the court. You'll start a war, she warned. I already did, he said, the moment I saw you. But even as he spoke those words, Damonius knew the truth. He could not protect her and keep the throne. And yet he could not bear to lose either, unless he did the impossible. Choose both. He would not protect Seraphina from the court. He would protect her through it. As more than a servant, as more than a girl from the past, as the rightful heir, as his equal, as his queen. Some crowns are forged in fire, others in mercy. There had never been silence in the Crimson Court, not truly, but tonight it rang louder than any scream. Hundreds of eyes turned as Damonius Thane strode into the throne chamber, the doors booming shut behind him like a war drum. At his side walked Seraphina, no longer a servant hidden in the queen's shadow, no longer draped in tattered grays. Tonight, she wore midnight blue, the color of Kael blood. Her back still bore the scars, but she held her head high. Her hands did not tremble. Damonius hadn't asked her to come. She had chosen to walk beside him, and that changed everything. The nobles shifted uneasily as they took in the sight. Whispers slithered like serpents through velvet and gold. The queen sat high upon her throne, her lips curled in venomous amusement. Well, Malverra purred, lifting her wine. I was beginning to think you'd flee, nephew. And yet you bring me a gift." Damonius didn't stop walking. He stepped onto the bloodstone dais and faced the court. Not as a general, as a king. "I bring you truth," he said, voice echoing. "And a reckoning." The queen arched a brow. "And what reckoning is this? The servant girl who whimpers in her sleep?" Seraphina didn't flinch. "She is Kael blood," Damonius said. "The last living heir to the House of Mercy." Laughter broke across the court, mocking, sharp, disbelieving, until Seraphina took a step forward and spoke. "Test my blood," she said, steady and clear. Silence dropped again. "I bear the crest burned into my back. I carry the memory of my family's slaughter, and I stand here not to beg, but to reclaim what was stolen." Damonius turned to her, eyes burning gold. He unsheathed his dagger, slit the inside of his wrist, and extended it toward her. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Offering blood in court, openly, wasn't just symbolic. It was sacred. But Damonius didn't offer it to bind her. He offered it to protect her. "To drink this is not to submit," he told her, soft and solemn. "It is to live, to rise, to survive what they fear you becoming." Seraphina stared at the blood. Her throat worked. And then, "No," she whispered. Damonius blinked. "What?" "I won't take your blood to survive," she said, raising her eyes to his. "But I will take it to stand beside you." His gaze darkened. "Are you certain?" She nodded once. "I will not be caged again. Not by fear. Not even by love." A slow, fierce smile curved his mouth. He stepped closer, brushed her hair behind her ear and said, "Then drink, my queen." Her lips met his wrist. The blood burned like liquid starlight. Magic surged. Not violent, not forced. Chosen. When she pulled away, a silver flame curled across both their wrists. A soul mark forming between them. A bond not made of power, not forged by court law, made by choice. The queen rose, her goblet crashing to the floor. "Enough!" Her voice cracked like lightning. "You will not play this charade in my court." And then, she lunged. A dagger slipped from her sleeve, gleaming obsidian and venom-coated, aimed straight for Seraphina's heart. But Damonius moved faster, his arm crossed in front of her. The blade met flesh, his flesh. Blood spattered across the floor. Gasps echoed. The queen froze, stunned. Damonius didn't falter. He gripped the blade still buried in his forearm and snapped it in half with a single twist. The court erupted into chaos. Nobles shouted. Guards drew weapons. Chaos threatened to consume the chamber, but Damonius's voice cut through it like a blade. "Enough!" Everyone stopped. He stepped forward, blood dripping down his fingers, and threw the shattered dagger to the queen's feet. "You have ruled through fear long enough," he growled, "but fear dies today." He turned to the nobles. "I invoke blood law," he said. A hush fell. "By right of Kael descent, by mark and prophecy, I name Seraphina Kael as co-heir to the throne of mercy." Screams, protests. Half the court rose to their feet. "She's a servant. She's dangerous. She," Damonius snarled, "is mine." He looked back at Seraphina. "And I am hers." The soul mark on their wrists glowed brighter. The queen stared, lips trembling in rage. "You would burn 1,000 years of tradition for her." Damonius stepped down from the dais, pulled Seraphina gently into his arms, and replied, "Yes, Remember, some thrones are taken, others are offered, with a wrist and a vow. If you felt every heartbeat in this chapter, drop a crown in the comments. The moon garden hadn't bloomed in 100 years. Not since Queen Malverra's rise. Not since the last real Queen of Peace, the one Seraphina descended from, was burned out of history. Now, under the blood-red sky of dusk, soft moonlight filtered through the cracked silver dome, casting ethereal shadows over forgotten vines and frost-laced petals. But something was changing. Something ancient was waking, and in the middle of it stood Seraphina and Damonius. No throne between them, no court, no crown, just the hush of a place they once knew as children, a place they'd found each other, again. Damonius watched her quietly, his red velvet coat fluttering in the breeze. The wind picked up her hair, long, dark, kissed with silver at the roots, and for a moment she looked like something from a myth. Not a servant, not a pawn, his. But he didn't touch her, not yet. "I almost didn't recognize this place," Seraphina whispered, kneeling beside a dead rosebush. He stepped closer. "It remembers you." Her fingers grazed the brittle leaves. "It shouldn't. I didn't do anything to deserve its beauty." "You survived," Damonius said. "You are its beauty." She looked up at him slowly, the glow of the soul mark on her wrist pulsing like a heartbeat. The garden held its breath. "You never stopped looking at me that way," she said softly. "Even when I was nothing." "You were never nothing," he replied, kneeling beside her. "You were stolen, silenced, but never nothing." Her throat tightened. She turned away, just slightly, but he caught her chin, gently, and tilted her face back toward his. "You know the first time I saw you," she said, voice trembling. "After all those years, I thought he forgot." Damonius froze. "I remembered everything," he said, his voice low and aching. "Even when they tried to erase you. Even when they bound you in silence and sent me to war. I remembered the girl in the garden, the rose she gave me, the song she hummed." She blinked fast. "The lullaby." He nodded once. "You were the only thing I remembered clearly. Everything else blurred. But not you." Seraphina's lip trembled. "I hated you for it," she admitted. His brow furrowed. "I hated that you were allowed to forget. That I wasn't even allowed to speak your name." "I never forgot," he whispered again. "I couldn't." Silence fell. But it wasn't empty. It was full, of meaning, of breathless promise, of the kind of quiet that made your ribs ache and your chest warm. Seraphina stood, brushing dirt from her palms. She walked to the center of the garden, where the moonstone fountain sat cracked and dry. She stood beneath it, as the red sky bled through the arches above, painting her in crimson. "I used to come here in dreams," she said, "when the beatings were too loud, when the queen would carve new stories into my back. I used to lie on the cold stone and pretend the stars were watching." "I was watching," Damonius said, stepping toward her. "Even when I couldn't save you." She turned and smiled. Not a sad smile, not a broken one, the kind that blooms like the first crocus after a frost. He crossed the final step between them. "Seraphina Kael," he said, his hand lifting to touch her face. "You silenced the queen without raising your voice. You survived every cruelty. You carry power in your gentleness, and you made me remember how to feel." Her breath caught. He leaned forward, slow, reverent. Their foreheads touched, His hands cradled her waist. And then he kissed her, soft, sure. No hunger, no dominance. Just devotion, just home. Her fingers curled into his shirt. His soul mark flared warm against her wrist. And behind them, the roses bloomed. 100 of them. 1,000. Silver white and blood red bursting open along the vines, spiraling up broken arches and climbing the cracked pillars. The garden exhaled. The first scent of true magic in a century filled the air. Seraphina pulled back slightly, eyes wide. "You brought them back," she whispered. Damonius shook his head. "You did." She laughed. Not a small laugh, a full one. Bright, loud, free. And he fell in love all over again. Not with the servant, not with the heir. With her. Just her. The girl in the garden. The woman in the storm. His queen. They. Some kisses don't set you on fire. They plant you back into the earth where you belong. The silence that once suffocated the moon court had changed. It was no longer cruel. Now, it was reverent. Queen Malverra's screams had echoed down the stone halls of the palace as she was dragged from the throne room. Her blood-spell grimoire torn from her grasp, her magic shattered by the soul-marked truth of Seraphina Kael. No curses, no war. Only justice, delivered not in rage, but in light. And now the court stood beneath the glass spires and watched as a new queen rose. The throne was cold, carved of moonstone veined in silver and untouched by warmth for generations. Until Seraphina sat upon it, not in chains, not with her head bowed, but with her spine straight, her scars bare beneath a gown spun from midnight silk and rose thread lace. No longer a servant, no longer hidden. Beside her stood Damonius Thane, king of flame, warden of the Crimson Legion. But his eyes were only on her. He hadn't stopped watching her since the garden, since the moment the roses bloomed and she laughed, and his world reformed around the sound. They had not spoken of love. They hadn't needed to. It was there in the way his hand always found hers, in how she didn't flinch anymore when someone said her name, in how her smile finally reached her eyes. The ceremony was short. Vampires were not fond of long words. Not when so much had been buried in silence. But when the sacred sword touched her shoulder and the crown of mercy was placed on her head, the hall fell still. It wasn't fear. It wasn't submission. It was awe. The first queen in centuries chosen not by bloodlust or conquest, but by a broken heart that never stopped beating. The girl the queen tried to destroy now ruled the kingdom, and she did not rule alone. They freed the servants first. Every silencing spell was shattered, each charm cast into the fire of the altar where Seraphina once wept in silence. She spoke to each servant by name, held their hands, let them speak, even if their voices trembled. The court watched her redefine power with patience. Next came the scribes, who were ordered to restore every erased bloodline. Seraphina's name, Kael, was etched back into the royal archives in gold. The House of Mercy was reborn. Then came the gardens. The moon garden was open to all. Roses bloomed along every corridor. Vines twined through the palace windows, refusing to be trimmed. A new magic pulsed through the kingdom. Gentle, yes, but unstoppable. One night, days after the coronation, Seraphina wandered alone through the royal gardens. No guards, no eyes, just her, beneath the silver sky, walking barefoot in the dew. Behind her, she heard the footsteps she now knew by heart. Damonius. She didn't turn. He didn't call her name. Instead, he simply walked beside her. Their fingers brushed, then intertwined. The roses swayed. Moonlight fell across the broken stones where she once sat as a child, the same place she'd knelt in her dreams when the pain was too loud. Now, she knelt for no one. "You haven't said much tonight," he murmured. Seraphina glanced at him, the crown slipping slightly on her brow. He adjusted it for her with a gentle smile. "I'm afraid if I say too much," she whispered, "I'll cry. And if I start crying tonight, I might never stop." Damonius didn't answer. He only lifted her hand and kissed her palm. "Say one thing, then," he said softly. "One word, for me." She turned to him, eyes glinting like firelight against river glass. He searched her face. Not the title, not the power, just her. "Are you," his voice caught, "happy?" Seraphina smiled, and slowly her fingers moved in the air. Not out of silence, but out of choice. She signed, "Forever." Damonius exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for 1,000 years. They stood in silence as the sky shifted, and then, for the first time in centuries, the sun rose. It crested the mountains behind the moon court, spilling golden fire across the stone walls and blooming gardens. Light touched the throne. It did not burn. It healed. The people gathered in awe. And at the heart of it all stood a woman once silenced, now crowned. Her scars did not vanish. They glowed. "The Queen of Mercy," the people whispered. "The king who chose gentleness. The court that rose again, not by power, but by love. If you believe even the cruelest chains can break, if you believe love can start with a glance, if you believe that scars don't ruin you, they reveal you, then this was your story, and the next one waits, right around the garden gate. Don't forget to comment your favorite moment. Subscribe for more healing, heart-heavy, happily ever afters. Because we don't just write love stories, but we resurrect them.